Please be seated. Oh, that my words were written down, inscribed on a scroll, with an iron instrument and lead forever engraved on stone. But I know that my Redeemer is alive, whom I'll see myself, my eyes see, and not a stranger's. Words among words, good words, words from the Scripture, words from Job, attesting to what we will see, what is being given to us now to see. It's good to have these witnesses that we can receive and embrace and live by. I thank God for those. I thank God that we have many to turn to. And today, somewhat last minute, being substitute preacher here at St. John's, I'll offer some meditations on these scriptures from the last couple days that I've engaged in. And I pray that if they're kind of meager, that you have many other witnesses that you may also turn to, including Job, who leaves behind a record of his struggle, of his wrestling with God within his heart, with a God who is unknowable and yet loves him deeply and loves each one of us deeply and calls us into life with him. Oh, that we might have so many witnesses lying around to keep our hearts at peace, to give us patience when anxiety, when uncertainty would lead us in so many directions, destructive, confused, losing sight of whose we are. We're all born into this world, into historical time, and we find things lying around. And what we have lying around us is what we have to work with faithfully. We could call them habits of life, practices we engage in. Speaking of faith, we have rituals and places of worship and scriptures and teachings. We have institutions, which are our way of embodying, incarnating, making real commitments that we have spiritually, ethically, politically. Institutions where our movements really find their matrix and their home, after all. And we find persons who aren't just lying around, but living around us, and who love us, and who guide us. And by grace, they help us to listen. They help us to listen to what is true, and to borrow a phrase from a spiritual great, to listen for what is genuine within ourselves and within others. And to not just listen for it, but to live from it. To live from it as the gift of God. Sometimes what lies around, however, or even those around us, habits, practices, institutions, movements, teachings, and persons, don't help us do that very well. They might stir the pot. They might confuse things. They may themselves be misled. They may be so caught within their own despair that what they have to offer is leading the sheep astray. This is perhaps the situation that we encounter in the gospel today as Jesus enters Jerusalem and meets yet another group within the larger world of Roman-occupied Jerusalem, the world of Jewish life and faith and institutions and practices and teachings, all inspired at root by a hope in God who gives life to the dead. He encounters these Sadducees, who, as the scripture says, they did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. And so they want to go up to Jesus and they want to find out what's going on with this guy. Just what is he about? Let's let's poke at him a little. Have you ever been poked at just so people kind of get a sense of who you are and what you're about? Maybe you're one of those people who likes to do that. I don't know. Jesus, teacher, here's a case for you to think about. There was you hear about this one? You wonder what was in their heart bringing this to Jesus. Perhaps they were very serious approaching Jesus with this carefully constructed legal case to prove a point. Back in the day, back in the world of the Torah, back in the world of life in which people lived and moved and had their being, of the Torah, they didn't have Social Security. They didn't have Medicare, even for some. What they had were institutions by which you were maintained in a lineage within a family when something tragic happened, perhaps when your husband died, and you did not have children, because at that time, a woman having children was what kept her in the lineage within the family and kept her safe, kept her with food and a place and care and a community. And so at that time, if a woman's husband died, then it fell upon the husband's brother to marry her, to have children together, so that she might be preserved within the family, and the memory of the husband, the first brother, might be preserved in the family. It might not be something that makes sense to us today, but that was the world they lived in. The Sadducees encounter this within the Scripture, and they take it to an extreme and present this to Jesus. Now, maybe they were very serious-minded kind of guys, and they had sweated night and day. They had burnt the midnight oil to come up with this extreme case. Jesus, what if this happened? That 7 brothers died. This woman remarried 7 times, and then she died. In the resurrection, how's all that going to work? Who is she going to be married to? Who was her favorite? And maybe they were jokers. Maybe they were unserious. Maybe they approached Jesus to poke fun at this man or to ridicule this man who believed and had already taught that there was life to come, that there was a world yet to be expected. Either way, whether they were deadly serious or deadly unable to be serious, perhaps they approached out of an unacknowledged despair in their heart about what was to meet them on the other side of the door of death. And Jesus responds. He doesn't step back. He doesn't get aggressive. He says, well, you know, guys, to paraphrase, you really don't seem to get it. This life is according to one order. The life to come is according to a whole other order. This world that you're describing, well, that's according to one set of institutions and practices which are meant to serve life and hospitality. And once all those brothers died, and once this woman died, who'd been through a tragic life, they will be taken up into the hierarchy of the celestial beings. They will be with the angels, who you guys don't believe in. They will be taken up into the world to come, into new life, where giving into marriage and being married is just not the way things are set up. Where the life we live, which contains its compromises and negotiations and its sometimes rather meager and shabby ways of doing things is no longer relevant. Because then we're living more fully, at the fullest, according to the vision of God, living in the resurrection life. So you might take that invitation, guys, to live according to the imagination, according to the way of being that God is inviting you into. I trust that when all these folks would come up to Jesus as he enters Jerusalem and poke at him a little bit, that what he was exercising was divine compassion. He was continuing to extend that invitation into the life to come, which is, in fact, coming to us now. He's inviting them to listen again for what God was doing in that moment, in their lives, in their households, in the institutions that served their life. Inviting them to listen for what the 20th century theologian, pastor, mystic Howard Thurman called the genuine. In a commencement address at Spelman University, Howard Thurman invited the graduates to listen for the genuine in their life. Because if they hadn't heard it, he said, it's better that you had not been born. Listen for what is genuine. Amidst all the voices, all the teachings, the institutions, the desires that come to you from those close to you, from your teachers, from your coworkers, that come down to you from generations past that you don't know, listen for the voice that is genuine, that invites you into new life. The Apostle Paul invites the community at Thessalonica, in the reading we heard today, to listen for the genuine. At a time when they're confused, when they're anxious, when they're perhaps bickering and arguing, when they're impatient, when they don't know what is to come, he counsels them to listen for the genuine. It's a time when they are living in expectation and hope of the order of life that Jesus Christ will bring about when he returns. And he's not working according to their timeline. And Paul counsels them to return to what was trustworthy and true, what was genuine, so to speak. He counsels them to listen to what he had taught and what his co-workers had taught and handed on. And he counseled them to beware of what was counterfeit, of those spiritual forces, those teachings, those inclinations and desires that tried to set themselves up in the place of God. Perhaps you in your life have become engaged in a work or a concern or a desire that seemed to start taking up all your time, all your energy, sort of became like the central value, maybe even started to shut out relationships in your life or push you away from church or other good influences on you. Paul counsels the people at Thessalonica to beware of what is counterfeit and to listen for what is genuine. To listen for that which gives them room to move, space to think, that which within which they have room to live and move and have their being, which helps them to move out of despair, which can lead us into impatience and anxiety and fruitless battles and territorial squabbles, and into hope and into courage. and into trusting that God is with us now, inviting us into life. And that if we listen for that which is genuine, if we listen for that which is true, if we listen for that which is the world to come, breaking in among us, then we can shape what we do each day. By God's grace, we can shape the teachings, the writings, the words, the buildings, the institutions that we leave behind and that we live and work in now. We can shape them to be invitations to others, to live and move and have their being, and to listen for what is true and for what is genuine.